My name is Leonardo Ferretti, and I am a forensic neuropathologist with 28 years of experience. In nearly 3 decades of practice, I have performed more than 4,000 autopsies, examined thousands of human brains, and documented every imaginable type of neurological pathology. Brain tumors of every grade and histotype, ruptured and intact cerebral aneurysms, traumatic brain injuries from car accidents and falls, neurodegenerative conditions from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's, rare and common congenital malformations. I have seen brains devastated by alcohol, brains eroded by bacterial and viral infections, brains compressed by subdural hematomas, brains atrophied by decades of dementia. I sincerely thought I had seen everything that human anatomy could offer. I firmly believed that science had already catalogued every possible variation of brain tissue, every anomaly, every deviation from the norm. I was convinced that after 28 years spent dissecting, analyzing, and studying the human brain, there was nothing left that could surprise me. I was wrong. Completely and profoundly wrong. It was October 13th, 2006. A particularly grey Friday morning in Monza. The autumn fog enveloped the Lombard city like a shroud, barely filtering the sunlight that tried futilely to penetrate through the low clouds. I was sitting in my office on the 3rd floor of the Institute of Pathological Anatomy, surrounded by the usual stacks of medical reports, autopsy photographs, and histological slides awaiting review. I had just completed my 2nd autopsy of the week, a case of myocardial infarction in a 62-year-old man, nothing particularly complicated or scientifically interesting. I was completing the documentation when my assistant, Dr. Filippo Cavalli, entered my office with an expression that immediately struck me. Cavalli had been working with me for 5 years, and I knew him well. He was a competent, methodical professional, rarely emotional. But at that moment, his face showed something that resembled discomfort, perhaps even sadness. "Professor," he said cautiously, "a particular case has arrived from San Gerardo Hospital. A 15-year-old boy who died yesterday morning at 6:45 from acute promyelocytic leukemia with massive cerebral hemorrhage. The family has expressly requested a complete and detailed neuropathological examination. They want to know exactly what happened in their son's brain." 15 years old. I sighed deeply, placing my fountain pen on the desk cluttered with reports, photographs, and scientific documentation accumulated over recent days. Throughout all these years of practice, autopsies on young people had always been the most difficult to face, not so much from a technical or professional standpoint, but because of the emotional weight they inevitably carried. Every time I had to examine the body of a child or adolescent, I couldn't help but think of my son Matteo, who had turned 14 that very year. But I was a professional trained and tempered by decades of experience. My scientific rationality, my methodical and objective approach, had always prevailed over any form of sentimentality or emotional involvement. They had to prevail. It was the only way to do my job well, to provide precise answers to families who entrusted their loved ones to my hands and my instruments. "Patient's full name?" I asked in a neutral tone, already opening the computer and accessing the hospital information system where all electronic medical records were archived. "Carlo Acutis, born May 3, 1991 in London, but resident in Milan since he was a few months old. Admitted urgently on Sunday, October 8th, with symptoms of high fever, general malaise, and widespread petechiae. Immediate diagnosis in the emergency room. Acute promyelocytic leukemia, type M3. He was transferred here to San Gerardo on Monday, October 9th for specialized hematological treatment. Conditions deteriorated rapidly despite aggressive therapy. Wednesday, October 11th. In the evening, massive cerebral hemorrhage with rapid progression to coma. Brain death declared at 1700 hours on the same day. Biological death confirmed Thursday, October 12th at 6:45 in the morning. I mechanically noted all the data in my notebook with the precise handwriting I had developed over decades of medical documentation. M3 leukemia, I thought while writing. one of the most aggressive and fulminant forms of acute leukemia, characterized by disseminated coagulopathy that causes uncontrollable bleeding throughout the body. Cerebral hemorrhage was a frequent and often fatal complication in these cases, caused by the severe alteration of coagulation factors specifically associated with this leukemia subtype. From a strictly neuropathological perspective, I expected to find diffuse hemorrhages in the cerebral cortex, probably massive cerebral edema with herniation of the cerebellar tonsils, perhaps some disseminated microinfarcts caused by coagulopathy, possibly cerebral venous thromboses. Nothing particularly unusual or unexpected, unfortunately. It was a pathological picture I had seen dozens of times in my career, albeit rarely in patients so young. "When can we proceed with the autopsy?" I asked, mentally checking my schedule for the day and calculating the time needed for a complete and accurate neuropathological examination. The family has already given written consent this morning and specified that they want the autopsy as soon as possible. "We can begin this afternoon, if you prefer, Professor. I have already prepared the necessary documentation and obtained all authorizations." I checked my wristwatch, an Omega my wife had given me 20 years earlier for our wedding anniversary. It was 11:15. I still had some phone calls to make, a couple of urgent reports to complete, and I wanted to dedicate at least half an hour to personally review all the boys' clinical documentation before beginning the autopsy procedure. "All right, Cavalli. Prepare autopsy room number 2 for precisely 1400 hours. I want everything ready, complete photographic equipment with digital SLR camera and macro lenses, the stereoscopic operating microscope with fiber optic illumination, all fresh fixation solutions, and absolutely make sure the high-definition video recording system works perfectly. If there was a massive cerebral hemorrhage, as indicated, I want to document every single aspect in minute detail, every lesion, every damaged area, every compromised structure. Also, prepare the complete kit for tissue sample collection. We'll need to fix numerous samples for in-depth histological analysis." Cavalli nodded with the professionalism I appreciated in him and left the office to organize everything necessary. I remained alone, looking through the large window overlooking the hospital's inner courtyard. The leaden October sky seemed to press down on the city. The leaves on the courtyard trees had taken on the dull colors of late autumn. I thought briefly about the boy waiting for me in the morgue's cold storage. Carlo Acutis, 15 years old, the same age as my son Matteo, actually 1 year older. For a moment, just a very brief moment, I consciously allowed myself to feel compassion, to feel the terrible weight of that young life cut short so prematurely. Then, as I had always done for 28 years, as I had trained myself to do from the first day of my pathological anatomy internship, I firmly closed that emotional door and returned to my rigorous scientific protocols. Sentimentality, excessive empathy, personal involvement had no place in my laboratory. They could have no place if I wanted to do my job well. I had to be objective, detached, scientific. I dedicated the following hours to completing reports from previous autopsies, but my mind kept returning to the afternoon's case. Not because it was particularly complex from a medical standpoint, but because of that indefinable unease that sometimes precedes something important. I dismissed it as simple fatigue. I had worked 12 hours the day before. At precisely 1400 hours, I entered the autopsy room. The environment was exactly as I wanted it. Intense surgical lights, controlled temperature at 18 degrees Celsius, instruments arranged with millimeter precision on the sterile cart. The boy's body was already on the autopsy table, covered with a green sheet. Cavalli had prepared everything perfectly. I put on my lab coat, double gloves, mask, surgical cap, and protective goggles. Then I approached the body. Before uncovering it, as I always did, I checked the clinical documentation again on the tablet. Carlo Acutis, born May 3rd, 1991 in London, resident in Milan. Admitted October 8th with high fever and general malaise. Immediate diagnosis, acute promyelocytic leukemia. Transferred to San Gerardo for specialized treatment. October 11th, requested anointing of the sick and communion. Evening of the 11th, massive cerebral hemorrhage, coma. October 12th, 06:45 hours, death. A detail in the medical notes struck me. The boy, despite knowing the severity of his condition, had shown extraordinary serenity. He had asked for the sacraments not out of fear, but with a lucidity and peace that had impressed all the medical staff. He had even comforted his mother, telling her he would go straight to heaven. Curious reaction for a dying 15-year-old, I thought with my habitual rational skepticism. "Professor, we're ready," Cavalli announced, activating the camera. I lifted the green sheet. Before me was the body of a teenager who simply looked asleep. Brown hair, delicate features, slender build. There were no external signs of the trauma that must have devastated his brain. I began the external examination, dictating my observations to the recorder. Male subject, age 15 years, approximate height 165 centimeters, estimated body weight 55 kilograms, absence of external trauma signs, marked skin pallor, consistent with severe anemia from leukemia, multiple petechiae on chest and upper limbs, indicative of thrombocytopenia. I proceeded with the preliminary examination, following standard protocol, but it was the brain that interested me. That's where the final drama of this young man had unfolded. After about 45 minutes of systematic body examination, I finally arrived at the crucial phase, opening the skull. I took the surgical scalpel with blade number 22, the one I always used for initial cranial vault incisions, and began the coronal incision following the classic Gon technique. From the left retro-auricular region, ascending over the vertex of the skull, to the right retro-auricular region. The cold, perfectly sharp blade sank into the skin with the mechanical precision born from thousands upon thousands of identical gestures repeated over nearly 3 decades. I felt the resistance of the tissues yield under the controlled pressure of my hand, the characteristic sound of cutting through skin, subcutaneous tissue, galea aponeurotica, periosteum. I retracted the scalp anteriorly and posteriorly, completely exposing the white, glossy cranial vault, the cranial sutures still partially visible despite the boy's age. Then, with the striker oscillating electric saw that emitted its familiar high-pitched hum, I meticulously began to section the compact bone of the cranial vault, following exactly the line of the skin incision. I worked with slow, controlled movements, being careful not to penetrate too deeply to avoid damaging the underlying dura mater and the precious brain tissue that I had to preserve as intact as possible for examination. The sound of the saw cutting through bone filled the autopsy room. That sound which after years no longer disturbed me, but which I remembered perfectly, had caused me strong discomfort during the first autopsies of my career, when I was just an inexperienced and impressionable resident. Cavalli continuously aspirated bone debris and the heat generated by friction with a suction pump connected to a transparent plastic tube. After about 12 minutes of precise methodical work, I completed the circular cut. With an expert, delicate movement, I leveraged the skull cap using an anatomical chisel and lifted it completely, finally exposing the dura mater, the outer fibrous membrane that wraps and protects the brain like a resistant sheath. And there it was, still protected by the turgid, tense dura mater, the human brain. After 28 years of practice, thousands of autopsies, hundreds of brains examined and dissected, that sight still moved me deeply, even though I would never openly admit it to any of my colleagues or assistants, not even to my wife. Approximately 1.5 kilograms of grey and white matter, soft and gelatinous, which had contained absolutely everything that had made Carlo Acutis unique and unrepeatable during his 15 years of life. His deepest and most personal thoughts, his joyful and sad emotions, his memories from childhood to adolescence, his dreams and hopes, his distinctive personality, his relationships, his affections, everything, absolutely everything, enclosed in that pinkish, smooth organic mass, now immobile and silent forever. I carefully observed the dura mater before incising it. It was visibly tense, almost swollen, with a diffuse, slightly purplish coloration that was absolutely not normal. Unmistakable sign of underlying hemorrhage, of blood accumulated in cerebral spaces. With sharp, slightly curved surgical scissors, I incised the dura mater with extreme delicacy, following the line of the great cerebral falx, the vertical fold that separates the two hemispheres. As I cut, the membrane retracted laterally, progressively, and completely exposing the surface of the cerebral hemispheres. The characteristic smell of fresh brain tissue and coagulated blood immediately invaded my nostrils through the surgical mask I wore. A smell I knew perfectly well after so many years, metallic from the blood and organic together, slightly sweetish, a smell that had become almost neutral to me over time, but which I know well is extremely unpleasant for those not accustomed to working daily with the dead. The brain's surface clearly showed signs of the hemorrhage that had killed the boy. Vast areas of reddish-purple coloration extended over the cortex, particularly concentrated in the right hemisphere and parietal lobe. Coagulated blood filled the subarachnoid spaces. It was exactly what I expected to find. Diffuse subarachnoid hemorrhage, I dictated to the recorder, with particular involvement of the right hemisphere. Evident blood extravasation in the parietal lobe, and I stopped. Something didn't add up. Despite the massive hemorrhage that theoretically should have devastated the entire brain structure, some areas appeared strangely preserved, not just intact, but, how to say, almost luminous. I shook my head. It must have been an effect of the surgical lights reflected on the moist tissue. With extreme delicacy, I began to lift the brain from the skull, progressively severing the cranial nerves and blood vessels that anchored it to the base. 12 pairs of cranial nerves, sectioned with millimeter precision. Finally, after about 20 minutes of meticulous work, the brain was free. I lifted it with both hands and placed it on the weighing tray. The scale read 1,320 grams, slightly below average for a 15-year-old male, probably due to the disease's rapid progression. I transported the brain to the dissection table and positioned it under the operating microscope lights. The time had come for detailed examination. I began inspecting the external surface, looking for other areas of hemorrhage or possible malformations. The cerebral sulci, the convolutions, everything seemed anatomically normal, apart from the evident hemorrhagic patches. I gently turned the brain to examine the base. There too, normal, or at least so it initially seemed to me. Then I saw it clearly for the first time. A specific area in the right temporal lobe, right above the hippocampus region, one of the most important brain structures for memory and learning, where the brain tissue seemed profoundly different. Not hemorrhagic as I would have expected, not damaged or necrotic, not compressed or edematous. Simply different in a way I couldn't immediately define or classify according to my consolidated diagnostic categories. I moved even closer with the stereoscopic microscope, gently turning the knob to progressively increase magnification from 10 to 20, then to 40 times. The tissue in that specific area had a visually unusual consistency, a surface texture I had literally never observed before in my entire long career. And there was that strange diffuse luminescence, that faint but undeniable glow, still clearly present and visible even without the direct, concentrated effect of the powerful surgical lights. "Cavalli, come see this immediately," I called my assistant, trying to maintain a professional, controlled voice despite growing scientific curiosity and, I must admit, a certain instinctive discomfort growing inside me. He quickly approached the autopsy table and bent down to look carefully through the twin eyepiece of the stereoscopic microscope. I heard him involuntarily hold his breath for a few seconds, then emit a guttural sound of surprise. "Professor Ferretti, but what exactly is this formation? I've never seen anything like it in neuropathology textbooks, in any of the autopsies I've attended. Honestly, I don't yet know with certainty, Cavalli," I admitted with difficulty, and those 4 words cost me much more than I would ever want to admit. In my entire professional career, lasting nearly 3 decades, I had always had a clear answer, a precise diagnosis, a rational explanation. Always, in every single case. Immediately prepare the microscope slides and sterile containers for tissue samples. We absolutely must take multiple tissue samples from this anomalous area for in-depth histological, immunohistochemical analysis and electron microscopy if necessary, and maximize the brightness of the photographic system. I want to photographically document this finding in the highest resolution before any manipulation or sampling that could alter its original appearance. While Cavalli meticulously adjusted the halogen lights and carefully prepared the professional Canon digital SLR camera with 100mm macro lens, I continued obsessively observing that anomalous area through the microscope, trying to understand, to categorize, to find a reference among the thousands of neuropathological images archived in my memory. The more I observed it carefully, the more I became convinced it was absolutely not a post-mortem artifact caused by tissue fixation, nor an optical effect of the surrounding hemorrhage, nor a simple individual anatomical variation. It was something intrinsically structural, organized according to a recognizable pattern, geometric in a way that biological brain tissue simply should never be. Normal brain tissue grows and develops following complex chemical gradients, diffuse molecular signals, random but coordinated cellular interactions, stochastic processes guided by DNA but influenced by environment. The result is always an organic, irregular, asymmetric, variable structure. But what I was observing showed a level of geometric organization and symmetry that seemed to belong more to a mineral crystal or artificial structure than to naturally grown biological tissue. We methodically took over 50 digital photographs at the highest resolution from different precise angles and with different magnification levels, documenting every single visible detail of that extraordinary formation. Then, arming myself with an extremely sharp ophthalmic scalpel with blade number 15, one of the smallest and most precise that exist in surgery, I began with extreme delicacy to collect very thin tissue sections from the anomalous area, working with the absolute concentration of a microscopist preparing samples for critical analysis. Each single tissue section, no more than 2 millimeters thick, was immediately and delicately transferred with anatomical forceps into sterile containers filled with 10% buffered formalin for chemical tissue fixation, which would immediately block all enzymatic degradation processes and perfectly preserve the cellular structure for subsequent histological and immunohistochemical analyses. I collected a total of 12 samples from different depths and positions within the formation, meticulously labeling each container with alphanumeric codes, identifying their exact anatomical origin. I worked with such total and absolute concentration that I completely lost perception of passing time, completely forgetting the hour, the external world that continued its existence outside that autopsy room. Everything that wasn't that extraordinary brain and its growing mystery. Only that anomalous brain tissue before my eyes existed, and the urgent, almost obsessive need to understand, to comprehend, to find a rational scientific explanation. After collecting the samples, I decided to section the brain according to the standard coronal plane, cutting it into 1 centimeter thick slices. Each section would reveal internal structures. I positioned the large autopsy knife and began the first cut. The blade sank into the soft tissue with ease. First section, cortex, underlying white matter, lateral ventricles partially filled with coagulated blood, all predictable. Second section, third, fourth. As I proceeded, meticulously photographing each section, I approached the area that had intrigued me. The brain's internal structures revealed themselves progressively. The corpus callosum connecting the 2 hemispheres, the basal ganglia, the thalamus, the hypothalamus. Standard anatomy, compromised by hemorrhage but recognizable. Then I reached the section that crossed the right temporal lobe, the one that would include the anomalous area observed from the outside. I positioned the section under the microscope and I froze completely. My hands, accustomed to being steady as a surgeon's, began to tremble slightly. I had to lean on the table for a moment. "Cavalli," I whispered, with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "Look at this, and tell me you see it too." "But My assistant approached and looked through the microscope. I heard him hold his breath. "Professor Ferretti, but what is this?" What we were seeing defied all anatomical logic. Inside the brain tissue, in the area corresponding to the hippocampus and medial temporal cortex, there was a cellular formation that shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist. Neural and glial cells don't organize themselves this way. Never. In any human being. In any mammal. In any vertebrate. The formation had a perfectly symmetrical geometric structure. The cells were arranged in what appeared to be a radial pattern, emanating from a common center like the spokes of a wheel, or rather, like the petals of a flower viewed from above. But the most disturbing similarity was with a chalice. Yes, the cells formed a structure that resembled extraordinarily a chalice, with a solid base that widened upward into a perfectly proportioned cup. I counted quickly. 12 main radial lines, each composed of hundreds of cells aligned with millimeter precision. Between the main lines, secondary formations created a network of connections so dense and regular it seemed woven, not biologically grown. And at the center, in the stem of the chalice, there was a cellular aggregate of incredible density, where cells were so tightly packed they seemed fused together. "This is impossible," I murmured, more to myself than to Cavalli. "Brain cells don't organize geometrically. Neural growth follows stochastic, probabilistic patterns influenced by chemical gradients and electrical signals, but never so perfectly symmetrical, so organized." I took the micrometer and began measuring. The formation had a diameter of exactly 3.5 centimeters. The height, from base to top of the chalice, was exactly 4 centimeters. Not approximately 4 centimeters. Exact, as if someone had used a ruler to construct a biological structure. Cavalli removed his mask for a moment, his face pale. "Professor, in 28 years, have you ever seen anything similar?" "Never," I replied curtly. "And not just me. No one has ever seen it. Go immediately to my office and get all the pathological neuroanatomy textbooks. I want to check every documented case of brain malformation, neoplasia, dysplasia, anything that could even vaguely resemble this." While Cavalli ran to get the books, I remained hypnotized by that formation. I increased the microscope's magnification to maximum. At 400 magnification, I could see individual cells. And that's when I noticed something even more disconcerting. The cells weren't just geometrically organized, they were also morphologically atypical. The neurons in that area had dendritic processes much longer and more branched than normal, with incredibly numerous dendritic spines. Each spine represented a potential synapse, a connection with other neurons. I counted quickly on a single neuron, over 3,000 dendritic spines. A normal neuron has about 2,000, but these had 50% more, and the glial cells, the astrocytes that normally support and nourish neurons, showed an exaggerated stellate morphology, with processes extending in all directions, creating an incredibly dense support network. It was as if the brain tissue in that area had been optimized, refined, brought to a level of structural complexity superior to that of the rest of the brain. Cavalli returned with a pile of heavy neuroanatomy and neuropathology volumes. He placed them on the adjacent table, and we began frantically leafing through them. I checked congenital malformations, microcephaly, lissencephaly, polymicrogyria, schizencephaly. Nothing that even remotely resembled what I had before me. I moved on to brain tumors, glioblastomas, astrocytomas, oligodendrogliomas, medulloblastomas. Nothing. Neoplasms grow in a disorganized, infiltrative manner, not with this geometric symmetry. I consulted cases of focal cortical dysplasias, neuronal heterotopias, tuberous sclerosis. I even checked the very rare cases of cerebral teratomas, where completely different tissues grow inside the brain. Nothing. Absolutely nothing approaching this formation. "Professor," Cavalli said after 2 hours of frantic research, "there's nothing similar in all the medical literature. It's as if this structure were unique." Unique. That word resonated in my mind. In 2,000 years of anatomical studies, From ancient Greece to today, no one had ever documented anything like this. Yet there it was, before my eyes, real, tangible, measurable. I checked my watch. It was 1930 hours. We had worked uninterruptedly for 5.5 hours. Let's proceed with immediate histological analysis, I decided. I want to prepare stained slides tonight. I must see these cells under the optical microscope with specific stains. We began the histological preparation process. We took the formalin-fixed samples and processed them through paraffin embedding. Then, with the microtome, we cut extremely thin sections, only 5 micrometers thick, transparent as glass. These sections were deposited on slides and stained with hematoxylin-eosin staining, the standard in pathological anatomy. Cell nuclei would stain blue-purple, cytoplasm pink. While the slides dried, I went to the laboratory window. Outside, night had fallen. The lights of Monza shone in the darkness. I thought about Carlo Acutis, about that 15-year-old boy who, according to medical notes, had faced death with impossible serenity, who had told his mother he would go straight to heaven, who had asked for sacraments not out of fear but out of desire. For the first time in my career, I wondered, who was this boy really? What made him so special as to generate a brain formation that defied every known biological law? I dismissed those thoughts. I was a scientist. I couldn't allow myself speculations. Facts. Only facts mattered. And the fact was that I had before me an anatomical anomaly that required explanation. "Professor, the slides are ready," Cavalli announced. I returned to the microscope. I positioned the first slide under the objective and focused. What I saw literally took my breath away. At 400 magnification, with staining that highlighted cellular details, the structure was even more extraordinary. The neurons were perfectly aligned along the radial lines, like soldiers in formation. Their synaptic connections were so dense they created an almost continuous network. The astrocytes formed a geometrically perfect support framework, but there was something more. Something I only noticed with that specific staining. Inside the neurons, the cell nucleus showed an unusual chromatin pattern. The chromatin, the condensed DNA visible in the nucleus, was organized more compactly and regularly than normal. It was as if these cells were in a state of extremely elevated transcriptional activity, producing proteins at a rate higher than normal. "We need to do immunohistochemistry," I said suddenly. "I want to test these tissues for every neuronal marker we have. Synaptic proteins, nerve growth factors, metabolic activity markers, everything." Immunohistochemistry is a technique that uses specific antibodies to identify particular proteins within tissues. We could literally see which proteins were present in the cells of that anomalous formation. We began that same evening, although we knew complete results would require at least 24 hours. Cavalli prepared tests for synaptophysin, a synaptic vesicle protein, for the neurotrophic factor BDNF, essential for neuronal survival, for MAP2 protein, specific to dendrites, and for GFAP, an astrocyte marker. He applied primary antibodies to the slides and placed them in temperature-controlled incubators. It was almost 2300 hours. We were exhausted, but neither of us wanted to leave. There was something about that discovery that kept us tied to the laboratory, as if leaving that room meant losing connection with something extraordinary. "Professor," Cavalli said after a long silence, "may I ask you a personal question?" I nodded, too tired to speak. "Do you believe in God?" The question caught me by surprise. Cavalli had worked with me for 5 years, and we had never talked about religion. "No," I replied curtly. "I'm a materialist. I believe in what I can observe, measure, test. Consciousness is an epiphenomenon of neuronal activity. When the brain dies, everything ends. There's no soul, no afterlife, no heaven. Just the end." "And this?" he asked, indicating Carlo's brain. "How do you explain it?" "I don't explain it yet," I admitted. "But I will. There will be a scientific explanation. There must be. Perhaps an extremely rare genetic mutation. a never-before-documented variant of brain development, or a still unknown effect of some environmental factor during gestation, I'll find the answer. But my voice lacked its usual conviction, and I noticed it. We spent the night in the laboratory, sleeping in turns on my office chair. At 6 a.m, we were already back at work. I checked the first immunohistochemistry results, and I discovered something that made everything even more mysterious. The synaptophysin levels in that formation were 3 times higher than normal. 3 times. It meant that synaptic density, the number of connections between neurons, was enormously higher than any normal brain tissue. And BDNF, the neurotrophic factor, showed very high levels, indicating that those neurons were in a state of extreme growth and plasticity, even until the moment of death. But the most disconcerting data came from metabolic tests. We had measured residual enzymatic activity in the tissue. Normally, a few hours after death, all metabolic processes cease. Cells degrade rapidly, but in that formation, 54 hours after death, there were still residual traces of metabolic activity. Minimal, almost imperceptible, but present, as if those cells were more resistant to death than normal brain tissue. And then there was the luminescence, that damned luminescence I kept seeing. I decided to test it scientifically. I took a spectrophotometer, an instrument that measures light emission, and positioned it over the tissue sample in a dark chamber. I lowered all the laboratory lights and activated the instrument. The display lit up. There was light emission, very weak, at the limit of instrumental detectability, but it was there. Wavelength, 5 to 10 nanometers, corresponding to blue-green. Intensity, 0, 3 lux, about 1,000th the light of a candle, but still, light, emitted from dead brain tissue. "This is impossible," I murmured for the 100th time. "Bioluminescence in mammals doesn't exist. It exists in jellyfish, in bacteria, in some abyssal fish, but not in humans, not in mammals, never." Yet the data were there, incontrovertible, measurable, repeatable. I tested that residual luminescence 3 times and always obtained the same result. Cavalli and I looked at each other. In his eyes, I saw the same dismay I felt. It was no longer a question of a simple anatomical anomaly. It was something that challenged fundamental principles of human biology. I had to know more. I picked up the phone and called Professor Giulio Mauri, Italy's foremost expert in cellular neurobiology, who worked at the University of Milan. I woke him at 7 a.m. on Saturday. "Giulio, it's Leonardo Ferretti. You must come immediately to my laboratory in Monza. I have something you need to see." "Leonardo, it's Saturday morning. Giulio," I interrupted, with a voice that admitted no reply. "In 35 years of friendship, have I ever called you for something frivolous? I found a brain formation that shouldn't exist, and I'm questioning everything I thought I knew about the human brain. Come, now." There was a long silence. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." When Professor Mori arrived, I led him directly to the microscope without saying a word. I showed him the brain sections, the high-resolution photographs, the immunohistochemistry results, the spectrophotometric data. I let him absorb everything in silence. After nearly 2 hours, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked aged by 10 years. "Leonardo," he said in a hoarse voice, "this formation cannot be natural. I mean, biologically, it cannot have formed following normal brain development processes. The geometric organization, the perfect symmetry, the synaptic density. It's as if someone had designed this structure, as if it were engineered." "Engineered," I repeated. "But by whom? How? When? This boy was born in 1991. We didn't have the technology to manipulate the human brain at that level then. We don't even have it now." "I know," Mori admitted. "That's why I can't explain it. Look at these dendrites. Look at the branching. It's optimal. It's perfect for maximizing synaptic connections. Any biomedical engineer would say it's the ideal design to increase neuronal processing capacity. But it can't be design. It grew naturally. Naturally, I murmured. That word was losing meaning. We spent the rest of the day analyzing every aspect of the formation. We performed genetic tests on DNA samples extracted from those cells, looking for mutations that could explain the anomalous structure. We found the genome perfectly normal. No mutations in genes controlling brain development. No alterations in transcription factors guiding neurogenesis. We consulted via email 3 other international neuropathologists, sending them the photographs, obviously anonymized. All responded with the same dismay. None had ever seen anything similar. One of them, a professor from Johns Hopkins, wrote, "If I didn't know your reputation, I would think this was digital manipulation. This structure cannot exist in nature." But it existed. It was there, in the slides, in the samples, in the photographs, in the measurements. As the sun set on the second day of our analyses, I found myself alone again in the laboratory. Mori had returned to Milan, exhausted and shaken. Cavalli had gone home to sleep. I remained, sitting at the desk, surrounded by piles of data, reports, photographs. I looked at one of the high-resolution images of the formation. That perfect chalice, those radial lines, that impossible symmetry. And suddenly, something clicked in my mind, a memory, something I had read in the boy's medical notes, his last words to his mother, "I'm going straight to heaven," and his passion, his obsession, according to family members, the Eucharist, the sacrament of bread and wine that become the body and blood of Christ, the chalice that contains the consecrated wine. No, 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 no. I stood up abruptly, shaking my head. I was a scientist. I couldn't make these connections. It was absurd. It was irrational. It was exactly what I was seeing. A chalice-shaped brain formation in a boy who had dedicated his short life to the Eucharist. A perfect, optimized, impossible neurological structure in an adolescent who believed he would go straight to heaven. A residual bioluminescence in dead brain tissue, in someone who spoke of eternal light. I sat down again, feeling my scientific certainties crumble like sand between my fingers. For 28 years, I had believed that science could explain everything, that the brain was just a complex but comprehensible organ, governed by chemical and physical laws. That consciousness was a simple product of neuronal activity, that when the brain died, everything ended. But what did that formation mean if it wasn't a mutation, wasn't a malformation, wasn't a tumor, wasn't anything known? What was it? And above all, why? Why in this specific boy? I opened the computer and searched for information about Carlo Acutis. I found articles on the internet, testimonies, photographs. He was a normal boy, passionate about computers and video games, like many teenagers. But he also had this extraordinary faith. He had created a website to catalogue all Eucharistic miracles in the world. At 13, 14 years old. He had organised exhibitions. He had helped the poor. He had said, "Everyone is born as an original, but many die as photocopies." And sadness is looking at oneself. Happiness is looking toward God. Profound words for a teenager. Too profound, perhaps. I looked again at the image of the brain formation, and for the first time in my rational, materialist, scientific life, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. What if that formation wasn't a coincidence? What if it were a sign, a physical testimony of something that goes beyond the material? No, I rejected that idea. There had to be a scientific explanation. Perhaps one we didn't yet know, but there had to be one. Science didn't have all the answers, but it had the method to find them. Sooner or later, we would understand. Yet, while formulating those rational reassurances mentally, I felt something inside me had cracked. A doubt. A crack in my edifice of materialist certainties. In the following days, I completed the formal autopsy. I documented everything with maniacal precision. I wrote a technical report of 40 pages, attaching hundreds of photographs and all histological and immunohistochemical data. I sent copies to the best neuropathologists in Europe and America. The responses were unanimous. Unique phenomenon, inexplicable in the current state of scientific knowledge, worthy of publication in the highest level peer-reviewed journals. But there was a problem. Carlo Acutis' family had the right to authorize or not the publication of post-mortem medical data. I had to contact them and ask permission, and I had to explain to them what I had found. The following week, I went to Milan to meet Carlo's parents, Andrea and Antonia Acutis. They received me in their home, still devastated by grief. The mother had eyes red from crying. The father tried to maintain composure. I explained to them, as delicately as possible, that during the autopsy, I had found an anomalous brain formation, unique in the history of medicine. "What does it mean?" the mother asked with a broken voice. How could I answer her? How could I tell a grieving mother that her son's brain defied the laws of biology? I chose my words with extreme care. It means that Carlo was extraordinary. Even physically, biologically, his brain had a structure that no one had ever seen before. I don't know what it means exactly, but it's unique, literally unique in the world. The mother looked at me with eyes that seemed to see beyond my words. "Doctor, do you know what Carlo always said? That his only desire was to go to heaven, that everything he did was to get closer to Jesus in the Eucharist. Did you think his brain was normal?" "Ma'am," I replied honestly, "I no longer know what is normal. What I know is that your son had something special, something that science cannot yet explain." "And will you publish it?" the father asked. "Will you make it known to the scientific world?" I hesitated. Publishing that case meant exposing myself. It meant telling the international scientific community. I found something I can't explain. For a neuropathologist of my experience, it was almost an admission of ignorance, but it was also the truth. "Yes," I finally replied. "With your permission, I'll publish it. The scientific world must know, must study this case. Perhaps someone, somewhere, will find an explanation that eludes me." The parents consulted each other with a glance. Then the mother nodded. "Do it, doctor. If this can help make Carlo known, if it can contribute to science, do it." Carlo loved knowledge. He loved understanding. He would have wanted this mystery to be studied. Before leaving, the mother gave me a photograph of Carlo. It portrayed him smiling, holding a laptop. He had bright, intelligent eyes, full of life. I looked at that photo for a long time. This was the boy whose brain I had dissected. This was the adolescent who had challenged my understanding of human biology. "Did he know?" the mother suddenly asked. Carlo always said that after death he would be remembered, that he would continue to testify. I thought he was talking about his faith, his works, but perhaps he was also talking about this, about his physical gift. I returned to my laboratory with the photograph. I hung it near the microscope, where I would see it every day, and I began writing the scientific article. I titled it, "Anomalous Neuropathological Formation with Perfect Geometric Organization, a Unique Case in Medical Literature." The article was published 6 months later in the journal Brain Pathology, one of the most prestigious in the field. The impact was immediate. Neuropathologists, neurobiologists, neurosurgeons from around the world contacted me. They wanted to see the samples, repeat the analyses, verify the data. We organized an international conference in Milan. Over 300 scientists participated. The proposed theories were numerous. Someone spoke of an ultra-rare epigenetic mutation. Others hypothesized an unknown neurotropic virus that would have modified brain development. There were also more exotic hypotheses: anomalous magnetic fields during gestation, exposure to unidentified chemical substances, even cosmic radiation. But no theory really held up when subjected to in-depth critical analysis. All proposed hypotheses had evident logical holes, insurmountable experimental inconsistencies, total lack of empirical evidence supporting them. The epigenetic mutation would have had to leave specific biochemical traces we didn't find. The hypothetical neurotropic virus should have been detectable with molecular biology techniques. But all PCR and immunofluorescence tests for known viral agents came back negative. Anomalous magnetic fields would have influenced the entire brain, not just such a specific and localized area. Cosmic radiation would have caused point genetic mutations we absolutely didn't find in genomic DNA analyses. The uncomfortable and undeniable truth was that we had absolutely no valid and verifiable scientific explanation. We only had the incontrovertible and documented fact, an absolutely impossible brain formation, according to all known biological laws, present in the brain of a 15-year-old boy who firmly believed in the impossible, who lived for the Eucharist, who spoke daily of heaven, of eternity, of divine light. During that international conference in Milan, I remember perfectly a particular moment. I was at the podium, projecting on a giant screen the highest resolution images of the brain formation. 300 scientists, among the most eminent neurologists and pathologists in the world, were looking at those images in an almost religious silence, if you'll pardon the paradoxical term. Then an emeritus professor from the Sorbonne in Paris, Dr. Jean-Pierre Moreau, a neuropathologist with 50 years of experience, raised his trembling hand and said in a voice broken with emotion, "Professor Ferretti, in 50 years of practice I have seen thousands of brains. I have studied every type of pathology, but this is something that challenges not only our current understanding, but perhaps the very possibility of materialist scientific comprehension. Perhaps there are biological phenomena that transcend the purely material." His words created a buzz in the room. Many colleagues shook their heads with disapproval. Science couldn't admit the transcendent, the supernatural, the metaphysical. Yet, that brain was there, documented, photographed, analyzed in every possible way, and it remained an absolute and impenetrable mystery. 2 years after that extraordinary and shocking discovery, something happened that shook even more deeply my wavering certainties and my materialist vision of the world. Carlo Acutis was officially declared venerable by the Roman Catholic Church, representing the first formal step in the long canonical process toward beatification and subsequent possible canonization. Then, with surprising rapidity, a miracle was officially recognized by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, unequivocally attributed specifically to his celestial intercession. The complete and instantaneous healing of a Brazilian child afflicted with a severe congenital pancreatic malformation that doctors considered absolutely incurable. And in October 2020, during a solemn and moving ceremony in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, Carlo was formally beatified before thousands of faithful from all over the world. Blessed Carlo Acutis, the first blessed of the digital native generation, the patron of the internet as many began to call him. I carefully watched the beatification ceremony in Assisi live on television that October day. Thousands upon thousands of young people from all continents, dressed in shirts printed with Carlo's smiling face, singing, praying, crying with emotion. And I wondered deeply, with a knot in my stomach, how many of them truly knew about the extraordinary secret hidden in that boy's brain? How many knew the documented scientific evidence testifying to something literally supernatural in him? How many knew that science itself, through my work as a pathologist, had found tangible and measurable proof that Carlo had been effectively different, special, unique, not only spiritually, but also physically, biologically, anatomically? Today, 4 years, exactly after that unforgettable night when I first discovered the extraordinary formation in Carlo's brain, I am 73 years old, having turned that age a few months ago. I am now very close to definitive retirement from my long professional career. I have personally published over 200 scientific articles throughout my entire career of nearly 3 decades, many in international journals of the highest impact, some becoming cited references in forensic neuropathology textbooks. But none, absolutely none of those articles has had the scientific, media, cultural, and even spiritual impact of the one dedicated specifically to the discovery in Carlo Acutis' brain. And the strangest, most surprising, most shocking thing for me is what has deeply happened to my person, to my worldview, to my most deeply rooted philosophical certainties. I, the radically convinced materialist, I, who firmly and dogmatically believed only in what I could directly observe, measure with instrumental precision, test experimentally in the laboratory. I, who openly considered religious faith as a consolatory psychological illusion for weak minds incapable of accepting the harsh reality of our finite and meaningless existence. Something fundamental and irreversible inside me has definitively changed. I haven't suddenly become a practicing and devout believer. I don't regularly attend the Catholic Church. I don't pray the rosary daily. I don't confess periodically. I don't participate in Sunday masses. But I am absolutely no longer so certain, so dogmatic, so closed in my previous materialist certainties. I have gradually begun to ask myself questions I would never have formulated before. What if there really were something objective beyond pure physical matter? What if human consciousness were not simply and only an emergent epiphenomenon of neuronal electrochemical activity? What if that extraordinary boy had been right when he said with absolute conviction and serenity he would go straight to heaven? What if the Eucharist were not just an empty ritual symbol, but a transcendent reality that can literally transform even the physical biological structure of the human brain? I don't have definitive answers to these disturbing questions. I probably never will have completely satisfying and rationally verifiable ones. But that impossible brain formation, that perfect anatomical chalice hidden in the temporal lobe of a holy teenager who passionately loved the Eucharist, taught me something absolutely fundamental about the nature of human knowledge and the limits of materialist science. Empirical science is undoubtedly powerful, extraordinarily useful, incredibly effective for understanding very many aspects of physical reality, but it is absolutely not omnipotent as I dogmatically believed. It cannot explain everything. There are authentic and profound mysteries that perhaps we are not destined to fully understand with the reductive tools alone of materialist reason and empirical investigation, or at least not in our current era, with our current limited knowledge and technologies. A few weeks ago, on a particularly beautiful and luminous spring day, I did something I would literally never have imagined doing, even in my most absurd dreams. I personally went to Assisi, the Umbrian city where Carlo Acutis is buried and venerated in the Sanctuary of Despoilment, the Franciscan place where St. Francis publicly stripped himself of all his earthly possessions to radically follow Christ in absolute poverty. I stopped in silence and contemplation before the transparent crystal case that contains and protects his body, incredibly preserved and incorrupt, despite the years past, dressed in his characteristic jeans and sweatshirt, symbol of his adolescent normality combined with his extraordinary holiness. And I looked for a long time, intensely, almost hypnotically at that young face, serene, peaceful, almost imperceptibly smiling, as if guarding a wonderful secret that we, the living, cannot yet fully understand. And in my scientific and rational mind, I inevitably saw superimposed that extraordinary brain I had literally held in my gloved hands. That perfect and impossible chalice formed by neural cells, organized according to laws that human biology doesn't know and perhaps cannot know. That structure that forever changed my understanding of what is possible in the biological universe. And for the first authentic time in 73 years of rational, materialist, skeptical life, I felt something new and unexpected being born inside me. Something that deeply resembled spiritual reverence, perhaps even an embryo of still confused and uncertain faith. I still don't know precisely if it was authentic religious faith in the traditional theological sense of the term. I don't know if it was just extreme scientific admiration taken to its maximum limit and transformed into something qualitatively different. But it was undoubtedly something real, authentic, transformative. Before leaving the basilica, while the sunset light filtered through the ancient coloured windows creating golden reflections on the medieval stone walls, I whispered softly, almost imperceptibly, "Carlo, I absolutely don't know if you can really hear me from whatever dimension you are now. I don't even know with philosophical certainty if you still exist as an individual consciousness, somewhere beyond the physical death of your brain and your body. But I must thank you deeply. Thank you sincerely for having shown me concretely, through your impossible brain anatomy, that there are phenomena, realities, dimensions of existence that go immeasurably beyond my limited scientific and materialist understanding. Thank you for having cracked my dogmatic and arrogant certainties. Thank you for having restored to me, at least partially, the capacity to marvel before mystery. Perhaps, ultimately, this was precisely your final message, your last teaching for us rationalist scientists, that reality is infinitely vaster, richer, more mysterious than our small human minds can ever conceive or measure. Today, I still meticulously preserve the histological samples of Carlo's extraordinary brain in my personal neuropathology laboratory, carefully preserved for eternity in chemical solutions of buffered formalin and cryoprotection at controlled temperatures. Occasionally, with increasing frequency in recent years, promising young researchers from prestigious universities worldwide come specifically to my laboratory to study them directly, analyze them with increasingly advanced technologies, ardently hoping to finally find the definitive scientific explanation that completely eluded me, despite all my efforts and professional experience. Perhaps they will succeed with new molecular imaging techniques, with ultra-high-resolution nuclear magnetic resonance, with advanced mass spectroscopy, with complete proteomic analysis, with cellular transcriptome sequencing. Perhaps one day, using more sophisticated and powerful biomedical technologies than those currently available, we will finally discover the precise molecular biological mechanism that spontaneously created that impossible anatomical formation. Or perhaps not. Perhaps some profound mysteries of existence are destined to remain such forever, inscrutable to human reason. And perhaps, paradoxically, that's perfectly fine. Perhaps we desperately need unsolvable mysteries to humbly remind us that, however intelligent and technologically advanced we have become as a Homo sapiens species, however much we have explored the infinitely large of the cosmic universe and the infinitely small of subatomic particles, the universe as a whole remains infinitely more complex, mysterious, rich in unimaginable possibilities than our limited biological minds can ever fully understand or reduce to mathematical formulas. Carlo Acutis said with extraordinary wisdom for a teenager, "Everyone is born as an authentic original, but many sadly die as faded photocopies." He undoubtedly died as an absolute and unrepeatable original. The anatomical original par excellence, a boy whose physical brain jealously guarded a biological secret that contemporary medical science still doesn't know how to decipher or adequately explain, a secret that has profoundly changed, transformed, revolutionized the worldview of at least one old materialist and dogmatic scientist like me. And perhaps, reflecting deeply on this entire transformative journey, this is precisely the true authentic miracle. Not only the anatomically impossible brain formation itself, but above all, the concrete and verifiable fact that through that extraordinary scientific discovery, through that unresolved and perhaps unsolvable biological mystery, a boy who died tragically at only 15 years old continues still today to speak eloquently, continues powerfully to challenge our consolidated certainties, continues tirelessly to invite wonder, amazement, mental openness toward possibilities that transcend the purely material and measurable. His personal story and my scientific discovery reminded me of something essential that I had forgotten or perhaps repressed during my long professional career. That empirical science, however extraordinarily powerful and useful it may be as a method of investigating physical reality, is not and cannot be the only exclusive way to authentically understand reality in its multidimensional totality. That there exist profound questions for which we simply don't have satisfying scientific answers, and that it's perfectly fine, it's perfectly intellectually legitimate not to have them. That unresolved mystery, sometimes and paradoxically, is much more precious, more fruitful, more stimulating than dogmatic and closed certainty. When I definitively retire in a few months, I will leave my laboratory. I will leave the microscopes, the slides, the samples, but I will take with me that photograph of Carlo, smiling with his computer, and I will take with me the memory of that night when I opened his skull and found the impossible. And every now and then, on sleepless nights, I find myself looking at the stars through my bedroom window. And I wonder, where are you now, Carlo? Did you really go straight to heaven as you said? And if you're there, do you know that your brain has left a legacy that goes beyond your faith? A scientific legacy that testifies to what? I still don't know. But perhaps that's precisely the point. Not knowing, remaining open, continuing to search, while accepting that some answers might never come, or might come in forms we don't recognize as answers. Science gave me a career, a method, a profession, but that brain, that chalice hidden in the temporal lobe of a holy teenager, gave me something more precious. Doubt. Fertile doubt, the kind that doesn't paralyze but stimulates. The doubt that says, perhaps you haven't understood everything. Perhaps there's more. And for this, in a strange and unexpected way, I am grateful. Grateful to that boy I never knew in life, but whose brain I literally held in my hands. Grateful for having shown me that, after 28 years of scientific certainties, I could still be amazed, still marvel, still doubt. Because ultimately, perhaps that's what truly makes us human, not the answers we have, but the questions we continue to ask ourselves. And Carlo Acutis, with his impossible brain, has left me the biggest question of all. If this story has touched your heart, as it has touched my scientific mind, and if you want to know other extraordinary testimonies about Carlo Acutis' life, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the bell. Because some mysteries, like the one I discovered, deserve to be shared, studied, and perhaps, one day, understood.